The lone silhouette of Thaddeus Walker materialized through the heat waves rising from the dusty main street of Gold Hill, Colorado. It was the summer of 1876, and the merciless sun beat down on the small mining town nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, where fortunes were made and lost as quickly as the changing mountain weather. His tall frame cast a long shadow as he dismounted his dappled gray stallion, the leather of his saddle creaking under his shifting weight. Thaddeus had ridden for 3 days straight, the weariness etched in the lines around his eyes and the dust coating every inch of his travel-worn clothes. At 32, he was no stranger to hard living. 10 years as a cattle driver, 2 as a deputy, and the last 3 trying his hand at prospecting had left him with little more than a reputation as a man who could handle himself and a small pouch of gold dust that felt too light in his pocket. The Gold Hill Hotel stood at the far end of the street, its weathered facade promising a hot meal and a real bed luxuries Thaddeus hadn't enjoyed since leaving Denver. He led his horse to the water trough outside the general store, watching as the animal drank greedily. "Easy there, Thunder," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. "We made it, old friend. You look like you've ridden through hell itself," came a voice from the store's porch. Thaddeus turned to see a portly man with an impressive gray mustache leaning against a post. "Feels that way sometimes," Thaddeus replied with a tired smile. "This town got a stable where I can board my horse. End of the street past the hotel. Jacob runs it. Tell him Milton sent you." The man adjusted his suspenders. "What brings you to Gold Hill? Not much gold left to find these days." "Just passing through," Thaddeus said, the lie coming easily. He wasn't ready to share that Gold Hill was his last hope, a desperate attempt to find his fortune before admitting defeat and returning to Texas to work his brother's ranch. "Well, if you're hungry, there's no better place than the Songbird Café. Naomi Dawson makes the best apple pie west of the Mississippi." Thaddeus nodded his thanks and led Thunder down the street, the mention of food making his stomach growl in protest of its emptiness. After securing a stall for his horse and booking a room at the hotel for a week, he made his way to the Songbird Café, drawn by both hunger and curiosity about this Naomi Dawson and her legendary pie. The café was a modest building with clean windows and gingham curtains, a splash of homeliness in the otherwise rugged town. A bell jingled as he pushed open the door, and the aroma of fresh bread and roasted meat enveloped him immediately. The place was busy with miners and townspeople enjoying their midday meal, their boisterous conversation filling the room. And then he saw her. She moved between the tables with a grace that seemed out of place in this frontier town. Her chestnut hair was pulled back, but a few strands had escaped to frame her face. She couldn't have been more than 25, her skin still unmarked by the harsh Colorado sun and her eyes a striking green that reminded him of spring meadows back home. Naomi Dawson. She glanced up, meeting his gaze for a brief moment, and Thaddeus felt something stir within him that had nothing to do with hunger. Then she smiled, not at him particularly, but a general welcoming smile she probably offered all newcomers, and gestured to an empty table by the window. "Be with you in a moment," she called out, her voice carrying a musical lilt that matched the café's name. Thaddeus removed his hat and sat down, suddenly conscious of the trail dust covering him. He ran a hand through his dark hair, knowing it did little to improve his appearance. His reflection in the window showed a weathered face with 3 days' worth of beard and eyes that had seen too much hardship for a man his age. "Welcome to Songbird," Naomi said, appearing at his table with a mug of coffee. "You look like you could use this first." "Much obliged," he said, taking the mug gratefully. The coffee was hot and strong, exactly what he needed. "I hear you make the best apple pie in these parts. Mr. Milton has been spreading tales again," she said with a laugh that lit up her entire face. "But I won't deny it's popular. Would you like to try some after your meal? I'd be a fool to pass it up." He took another sip of coffee, savoring the warmth. "What's your special today?" "Beef stew with fresh bread," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Made it this morning." "Sounds perfect." As she turned to leave, Thaddeus caught sight of a simple gold cross hanging from a chain around her neck. It winked in the sunlight streaming through the window, a small reminder of faith in a town where men often abandon such notions in pursuit of gold. "I'm Thaddeus Walker," he called after her, surprising himself with the introduction. She paused and looked back, her smile a little more personal this time. "Naomi Dawson, welcome to Gold Hill, Mr. Walker." The stew was everything a hungry traveler could hope for, rich, hearty, and clearly made with care. And the pie, Milton hadn't exaggerated. The sweet tart apples, the flaky crust, the hint of cinnamon, it was like tasting a piece of home he'd long forgotten. "This might be the best thing I've ever eaten," he told Naomi honestly when she came to check on him. "That's quite a compliment," she said, her cheeks coloring slightly. "Where are you coming from? That makes my pie such a revelation." "Denver most recently, but I've been all over." "Texas originally." "A long way from home." "Home is a complicated notion when you've been moving as long as I have." Something in her eyes told him she understood, though she didn't press further. Instead, she refilled his coffee cup and asked, "How long will you be staying in Gold Hill?" "A week to start. Thought I might try my luck in the hills." Naomi's expression shifted subtly. "There are easier ways to lose money, Mr. Walker." "Thaddeus, please. And I've heard the stories. I'm not expecting to strike it rich. Just—" He trailed off, not sure how to explain his desperate need to find something, anything, that could give him direction. "Just need to see for yourself," she finished for him. "I understand. Everyone who comes through that door is looking for something." She glanced around the busy café with a fondness that suggested she'd seen many such seekers. Some find it, some don't, but they all need to eat. A call from another table pulled her away, and Thaddeus watched her go, intrigued by the quiet wisdom in her words. Naomi Dawson wasn't what he'd expected to find in Gold Hill. But then again, he wasn't entirely sure what he'd been looking for in the first place. Over the next few days, Thaddeus fell into a routine. He'd spend his mornings exploring the hills around town with the tools he'd purchased from the general store, searching for any sign of gold in the streams. The afternoons were dedicated to talking with locals, trying to gather information about promising locations that might have been overlooked in the initial rush. And each evening, without fail, he found himself at the Songbird Café. It wasn't just the food that drew him back, though it was certainly exceptional. It was Naomi. Their conversations grew longer each time, beginning with polite inquiries about his day and gradually deepening into discussions about their lives, their dreams, and the world beyond Gold Hill. He learned that she'd come to Gold Hill 3 years earlier, following the death of her parents in a fire that had consumed their home in St. Louis. The café had been a rundown saloon then, but with her savings and determination, she transformed it into a respectable establishment where families could gather. It wasn't easy at first, she told him one quiet evening as she sat across from him after the last customer had left. "A woman running a business alone. Some folks thought it wasn't proper." "What changed their minds?" Thaddeus asked, captivated by the strength behind her gentle demeanor. "Persistence," she said with a small smile, "and food. It's hard to maintain your disapproval when your stomach's growling for someone's cooking." He laughed at that, appreciating her quiet confidence. "You built something special here. Thank you." She looked around the café, pride evident in her gaze. "What about you?" "What are you building, Thaddeus Walker?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years, not since his brother had tried to convince him to stay in Texas after their father's death. "I'm not sure I'm building anything," he admitted, the truth of it settling uncomfortably in his chest. "Just searching, I suppose, for gold." "I thought so, but—" He hesitated, then decided she deserved his honesty. "I think I'm searching for a purpose, something that's mine." Naomi reached across the table, briefly touching his hand, a gesture so unexpected and warm that it nearly took his breath away. "I hope you find it," she said softly. As he walked back to the hotel that night, Thaddeus wondered if he already had. A week passed, and Thaddeus extended his stay. His prospecting yielded nothing but sore muscles and sunburn, but he found himself reluctant to leave Gold Hill to leave Naomi. He began helping her with small repairs around the café, fixing a loose floorboard, mending a broken chair, patching a leak in the roof before the afternoon thunderstorms rolled in. She never asked for his help, but she accepted it with gratitude that made him feel more useful than he had in years. And in the evenings, after the café closed, they would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence as Naomi tallied the day's earnings and Thaddeus cleaned his prospecting tools. It was during one such evening that the conversation turned to faith. Thaddeus had noticed that Naomi always closed her eyes briefly before eating, her lips moving in a silent prayer. "Were your parents religious?" he asked, curious about this daily ritual. "They were," she said, her fingers automatically going to the cross at her neck. "My father was a deacon in our church. He believed in giving thanks for every blessing, no matter how small." "And you've carried on the tradition," she nodded. "It's a connection to them and to something larger than myself. Do you pray, Thaddeus?" He considered the question, remembering the stern Sunday services of his youth and the gradual drifting away that had happened as he'd grown older. "Not for many years," he admitted, though my mother would be scandalized to hear it. "Is she still alive, your mother?" "No, she passed when I was 16. My father followed 5 years later." He didn't mention the bitterness he'd felt at a God who would take them both, or the years he'd spent avoiding churches and prayer as if they were personal affronts. "I'm sorry," Naomi said, and he could see she truly meant it. "It's a hard thing to lose parents young. It shaped me for better or worse." He hesitated, then asked, "Does it help, the praying?" Her smile was thoughtful. "It reminds me that I'm not alone, even when it feels that way." "And gratitude. It changes how you see the world. Even on the hardest days, there's always something to be thankful for." Thaddeus pondered her words long after he'd walked her home to the small house behind the café. The next morning, as he sat alone at breakfast in the hotel dining room, he found himself pausing before his first bite, thinking of Naomi and her quiet faith. He didn't pray, but for the first time in years, he felt a stirring of something like gratitude for the food before him, for the roof over his head, for the chance encounter that had brought him to Gold Hill and to her. It was on his 9th day in town that tragedy struck. Thaddeus had ventured further into the hills than usual, following a tip from one of the old-timers about a stream that still occasionally yielded gold. He was kneeling by the water, pan in hand, when the ground beneath him shifted. Years of mining had left the hillside unstable, and the recent summer rains had loosened the soil further. He had only a moment's warning, a rumbling beneath his feet, and the sudden flight of birds from nearby trees before the earth gave way. Thaddeus scrambled for purchase, abandoning his tools as he clawed at roots and rocks, but the mudslide carried him downward, tumbling him against stones and fallen trees until a searing pain in his leg forced a cry from his lips. Then darkness claimed him. When consciousness returned, the sun was lower in the sky and his left leg was pinned beneath a fallen tree. Pain radiated from his thigh, and when he tried to move, the world swam before his eyes. With gritted teeth, he assessed his situation. The tree wasn't enormous, but in his position, he couldn't leverage it off his leg. He was trapped, at least a mile from town, with no one knowing exactly where he'd gone. As the afternoon faded into evening, Thaddeus fought against panic. He called for help until his voice grew hoarse, though he knew the chances of being heard were slim. The temperature began to drop as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and he pulled his jacket tighter, trying to conserve warmth. In the darkness, with pain his constant companion and the distant howl of coyotes echoing through the hills, Thaddeus found himself doing something he hadn't done in 15 years. He prayed. Not the formal prayers of his childhood, but desperate, honest words addressed to a God he wasn't sure was listening. "I don't know if you're there," he whispered into the night, "but if you are, I could use some help. Not just for me, but there are things I haven't said. Things I should have said." Naomi's face filled his mind, her gentle smile, her quiet strength, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed. "Please, just give me a chance to say them." The night stretched endlessly, pain and cold taking turns to torment him. By dawn, fever had set in, and Thaddeus drifted in and out of consciousness, his prayers becoming incoherent murmurs as the sun rose over the hills. It was the dog that found him first, a large, shaggy beast that Thaddeus recognized as belonging to Jacob, the stable keeper. The animal's excited barking roused him from his feverish state, and he managed a weak call in response. Minutes later, Jacob himself appeared over the ridge, followed by Sheriff Mills and, to Thaddeus's surprise, Naomi. "Thank God," she breathed, rushing to his side, her face pale with worry. "We've been searching since dawn." "How did you know?" Thaddeus managed, his voice a rasping whisper. "You didn't come for dinner," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "I asked at the hotel, and when they said you hadn't returned, I just knew something was wrong." The men worked to free his leg, their faces grim as they saw the damage. "Broken for sure," Sheriff Mills said. "Maybe worse. We need to get him to Doc Harris." The journey back to town was a blur of pain for Thaddeus. They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches and jackets, carrying him carefully down the treacherous hillside. Naomi walked beside him the whole way, her hand occasionally touching his arm, her presence a balm that helped him endure each jolting step. Dr. Harris confirmed what they already suspected. Thaddeus's leg was broken in 2 places, and infection had already set in. "It's going to be a rough few days," the doctor warned as he cleaned and set the leg. "The fever will get worse before it gets better, and you'll need to stay off this leg for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Thaddeus repeated, the implications sinking in. His meager funds wouldn't last that long, and the idea of being bedridden in the small hotel room was suffocating. "He can stay with me," Naomi said firmly, surprising everyone in the room. "I have a spare room behind the café." Dr. Harris raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on the propriety of the arrangement. "He'll need regular care, cleaning the wound, changing bandages, watching for signs the infection is spreading." "I can do that," she insisted. "My father was ill for months before he passed. I know how to care for someone." Thaddeus wanted to protest, to insist he could manage on his own, but the truth was, he couldn't. And some selfish part of him didn't want to refuse her offer. So it was that Thaddeus Walker found himself installed in the small bedroom behind the Songbird Café, his broken leg elevated on pillows, his future more uncertain than ever. The infection brought fevers that left him delirious, calling out names from his past and fighting battles long over. Through it all, Naomi was there, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, coaxing water and broth between his parched lips, speaking softly to him when nightmares made him thrash against the sheets. In his more lucid moments, he was embarrassed by his dependency, but Naomi brushed aside his apologies. "You would do the same for me," she said with quiet confidence. "Rest now. Healing takes time." As the fever gradually receded, Thaddeus began to notice the toll his care was taking on her. She ran the café during the day, prepared meals for both of them, and still found time to tend to his needs. Dark circles appeared beneath her eyes, and her movements, though still graceful, were slower with fatigue. "You're working too hard," he told her one evening as she changed his bandages. "You need to rest." "I'm fine," she insisted, though the weariness in her voice betrayed her. "No, you're not. Let me help at least with some things. I can sit at a table and chop vegetables, or, I don't know, tally your accounts." She looked up, her hands pausing in their work. "You know accounting," my father insisted I learn. Said a man should be able to mind his finances even if he prefers working with his hands. A small smile crossed her face. "That would actually be helpful. I'm not very good with numbers." It was a small victory, but it gave Thaddeus purpose. The next day, she set him up at a table in the kitchen, where he could work on her ledgers while still being out of the way of the cafe's operations. As he pored over her accounts, he discovered that while the cafe was beloved by the townspeople, it was barely profitable. Naomi was charging too little and paying too much for supplies, a combination that left her with almost nothing after expenses. That night, after the cafe had closed, he broached the subject carefully. "Naomi, have you ever considered raising your prices, even by just a few cents?" She looked startled. "Is it that bad?" "Not bad, but precarious. You're working incredibly hard for very little return." She sat down across from him, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I've thought about it, but some of my regular customers are struggling minors or widows with children. I hate the idea of making things harder for them." Thaddeus admired her compassion but worried about her future. "What if you created different pricing? Keep things affordable for those who need it, but charge a bit more for the travelers or the mine owners who can afford it." The idea sparked a long conversation about business and ethics, about balancing compassion with practicality. It was the first of many such discussions as Thaddeus's recovery progressed. They talked about improvements to the cafe, about dreams they'd set aside, about books they'd read and places they hoped to visit. In the quiet evenings, with the day's work done and the night stretching before them, they discovered a connection that went beyond friendship. It was during one such evening, a month into his recovery, that Thaddeus realized he was falling in love with Naomi Dawson. They were sitting on the small porch behind the cafe, watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the mountains. The air was electric with the coming rain, and Naomi's face was animated as she described a similar storm from her childhood. "The lightning hit our neighbor's oak tree," she said, her hands gesturing expressively. "Split it right down the middle. My father said it was God's way of reminding us of his power, but I always thought it was more like his signature writing his name across the sky in light." Thaddeus watched her, captivated not just by her story but by the passion with which she told it. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating her face for a brief, brilliant moment, and he felt something shift inside him, a certainty he hadn't experienced in years. "You have a beautiful way of seeing the world," he said softly when she finished. She turned to him, a question in her eyes, and for a moment he thought he might kiss her. But a crack of thunder broke the spell, and rain began to pour down in heavy sheets, forcing them inside. The moment passed, but the feeling didn't. Over the following days, Thaddeus found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to make her laugh, to learn more about her. He noticed the way her eyes lingered on him when she thought he wasn't looking, the blush that colored her cheeks when their hands accidentally touched, the conversations that stretched late into the night despite her early mornings. But he was still a man with no prospects, no home, and no clear future. His leg was healing, but Doc Harris warned it might never be as strong as before. His gold prospecting days were over, and though he'd saved some money by doing the cafe's accounts and odd repairs in exchange for his room and board, it wasn't enough to offer her the life she deserved. And so he said nothing, even as his feelings grew stronger with each passing day. He focused instead on getting well enough to walk without crutches, on helping around the cafe in ways that wouldn't strain his healing leg, on making himself useful enough to justify his continued presence in her home. It was Sheriff Mills who finally forced the issue, 6 weeks after the accident. He stopped by the cafe late one afternoon, nodding to Thaddeus, who was sitting at his now usual table working on the accounts. "Walker," he said, pulling up a chair. "Good to see you on the mend. Doc says you're doing well." "Well enough," Thaddeus agreed cautiously, sensing there was more to this visit than friendly concern. Mills leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "Town's starting to talk, son. A single man staying with a single woman, no matter the circumstances, it raises eyebrows." Thaddeus felt his jaw tighten. "She saved my life." No one's disputing that, but you're well enough now to move back to the hotel and folks are wondering why you haven't. The sheriff's expression was kind but firm. Naomi's a respected woman in this town. I'd hate to see her reputation damaged. The implication stung, but Thaddeus knew Mills was right. He'd been selfish, prolonging his stay because he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her. But in doing so, he was potentially harming the very person he cared for most. I understand, he said finally. I'll make arrangements today. Mills nodded, seemingly satisfied. For what it's worth, I think you're a decent man, Walker. Just want to make sure things are done proper-like. After the sheriff left, Thaddeus sat motionless, the ledger forgotten before him. The thought of returning to the impersonal hotel room, of seeing Naomi only during café hours, felt like a physical pain. But what alternative did he have? He couldn't offer marriage not when he had so little to give, and he wouldn't damage her standing in the community she'd worked so hard to build. That evening, he forced himself to broach the subject as they sat down to dinner. "Sheriff Mills came by today," he began, unable to meet her eyes. "Oh, is something wrong?" He suggested it might be time for me to move back to the hotel, for propriety's sake. Naomi's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her expression unreadable. "I see. He's right, of course. I've imposed on your hospitality far too long and people are talking." "Let them talk," she said with a flash of defiance that surprised him. "You're still healing." "Naomi," he said gently, finally looking at her directly. "We both know I'm well enough to manage on my own now, and I won't have people questioning your character because of me." She set down her fork, her eyes bright with emotion. "Is that the only reason you want to leave?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Thaddeus felt his heart pounding, knowing his answer could change everything. "No," he admitted finally. "The truth is, I don't want to leave at all. These weeks with you have been." He paused, searching for words adequate to express what she'd come to mean to him. "You've become important to me, Naomi, more important than I ever expected." A soft smile touched her lips. "You've become important to me too, Thaddeus." "But I have nothing to offer you," he continued, the words painful but necessary. "No home, no stable income, not even a clear direction for my future. You deserve better than that." "Shouldn't I be the one to decide what I deserve?" she asked quietly. "What I want. And what do you want?" She reached across the table, her hand covering his. "I want you to stay. Not just in that room, but in my life. I want to see if this feeling between us is as real as I think it is." Thaddeus looked at their joined hands, hope and fear warring within him. "And the town gossip." "There's a simple solution to that," she said, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "You could court me properly. Take me to church on Sundays, escort me to the town social next month, ask permission to call on me in the evenings." The idea of publicly declaring his intentions of officially courting Naomi Dawson filled Thaddeus with both terror and exhilaration. "Is that what you want?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "It's a start," she said softly. So began the courtship of Naomi Dawson and Thaddeus Walker, conducted under the watchful eyes of Gold Hill's residents. Thaddeus moved back to the hotel but spent his days helping at the café. In the evenings, he would walk Naomi home, sometimes lingering on her porch for conversations that grew increasingly personal and profound. On Sundays, they attended the small church together, Thaddeus feeling awkward and out of place at first, but gradually finding comfort in the rituals that meant so much to her. The town watched with interest as the unlikely pair grew closer. There were skeptics, of course, those who wondered what a refined woman like Naomi saw in a drifter with a limp, or who questioned whether Thaddeus would stay once his leg fully healed. But there were supporters too, like Milton from the general store, who declared they made a handsome couple, or Doc Harris, who noted that he'd never seen Naomi smile so much. For Thaddeus, the courtship was both wonderful and frustrating. Wonderful because each day brought new discoveries about the woman he was falling deeply in love with, her quiet strength, her unwavering faith, her dreams of expanding the café into a proper restaurant someday. Frustrating because the constraints of propriety meant their moments of true privacy were rare and brief, often limited to a quick kiss on her porch before he reluctantly returned to the hotel. And still, the question of his future loomed. With prospecting no longer an option, Thaddeus took odd jobs around town helping Jacob at the stables, assisting Milton with inventory at the store, even occasionally riding with the sheriff to deliver messages to outlying homesteads. The work was steady enough, but it wasn't a career, and it didn't feel like the purpose he'd been searching for. It was Jacob who offered the first glimpse of a possible solution. Thaddeus was helping him shoe a particularly stubborn mare, his hands steady as he held the animal's leg while Jacob worked. "You're good with horses," the stable keeper observed, hammering a nail into place. "Better than most who come through here. Grew up with them," Thaddeus replied. "My father bred quarter horses back in Texas." Jacob straightened, rubbing his lower back. "Ever thought of going into the business yourself? Gold Hill could use a proper horse breeder, someone who knows bloodlines and training. Nearest ones in Denver, and folks around here are always looking for good stock." The idea took root in Thaddeus's mind. He knew horses, their care, their temperament, their worth. It was knowledge his father had instilled in him from childhood, a skill set he'd taken for granted. Could he build something from that night? He shared the idea with Naomi as they walked slowly around the town square, the summer evening warm around them. "A horse breeding business," she repeated, considering. "That would suit you, I think. You light up when you talk about horses." "It would take capital to start," he said, thinking aloud. "Land, breeding, stock, stables, more than I have saved. There's that plot of land just outside town, the old Jenkins place. It's been empty since he passed last winter and his children moved east. It already has a small house and a barn." Thaddeus had seen the property, 15 acres of good pastureland with a modest but sound house and outbuildings. It was perfect for what he was envisioning, but far beyond his means. "I could talk to the bank," Naomi suggested, sensing his thoughts. "Mr. Finch respects me. He might be willing to consider a loan if I spoke on your behalf." "Naomi, I can't ask you to do that." She stopped walking, turning to face him in the fading light. "You're not asking, I'm offering, because I believe in you, Thaddeus, and because—" She hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty, "because I love you." It was the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud, though the feeling had been growing between them for weeks. Thaddeus felt something shift inside him, a final piece falling into place. "I love you too," he said, the words coming easily now that they'd been set free. "More than I thought possible, and I want to build something here, a life, a business, a future, with you if you'll have me." "Is that a proposal, Thaddeus Walker?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. He laughed softly, taking both her hands in his. "Not yet. When I propose, I want to have something solid to offer you, but it's a promise that I'm staying, that I'm committed to making a life here, to making a life with you." She stood on tiptoe and kissed him then, a brief but tender gesture that sealed the promise between them. "I'll hold you to that," she whispered against his lips. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. With Naomi's endorsement, Mr. Finch at the bank agreed to a modest loan that, combined with Thaddeus's savings, was enough to purchase the Jenkins property and 2 breeding mares. Jacob, excited by the prospect of a local horse breeder, introduced Thaddeus to contacts in Denver who might sell him a quality stallion on terms he could afford. Thaddeus threw himself into the work of preparing the property, repairing fences, cleaning out the barn, making the small house habitable. His leg ached at the end of each day, but the pain was offset by the satisfaction of creating something tangible, something that could grow. Naomi helped when she could, coming out to the property after the café closed to assist with painting or planting the small kitchen garden she insisted every home needed. Those evenings, working side by side as the sun set behind the mountains, were some of the happiest of Thaddeus's life. It was during one such evening, as they sat on the porch of what would soon be his home, that Thaddeus finally asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Naomi," he began, his heart pounding as he reached for her hand. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but these past months have shown me everything I need to know. You're the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I've ever met, and I love you with all that I am." Her eyes widened as he slid from the porch swing to one knee before her, wincing slightly as his bad leg protested the movement. "I don't have much yet," he continued, "but I have this land, the beginning of a business, and a heart that's completely yours. Naomi Dawson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Thaddeus, I will marry you." He rose to kiss her, his arms encircling her waist as he pulled her close. When they finally parted, both breathless, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold ring with a modest pearl at its center. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slid it onto her finger. "My brother sent it when I wrote to tell him about you. She would have loved you, Naomi." "It's beautiful," she said, admiring the way it caught the last light of day. "And perfect." They were married in Gold Hill's small church on a crisp October morning with most of the town in attendance. Naomi wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she'd ordered from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had belonged to her mother. Thaddeus, in a new black suit, stood tall at the altar, his leg much improved though he still walked with a slight limp that Doc Harris warned would likely be permanent. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the town square, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by well-wishers. There was music and dancing, laughter, and a few happy tears, as Gold Hill celebrated the union of two people who had found each other against all odds. As the afternoon faded into evening, Thaddeus led his bride to a table laden with the wedding supper. Before they began to eat, he reached for Naomi's hand, intending to say grace as she had taught him to do during their courtship. But in the excitement of the moment, with so many eyes upon them and his heart so full of joy, the words fled his mind. Naomi seemed to sense his momentary confusion. Without drawing attention to his lapse, she bowed her head and whispered the prayer for them both, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. "Lord, thank you for this food and for the hands that prepared it. Thank you for bringing Thaddeus into my life and for the love we share. Bless our marriage and help us to always remember your goodness, even in difficult times. Amen." When she finished, she looked up to find Thaddeus watching her with such tenderness that it made her breath catch. "What?" she asked softly. "He forgot to say grace. She bowed her head and whispered it for them both," he quoted, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's what Milton said the first day I saw you in the café. It's what made me notice your faith." "And now here we are," she said, returning his smile. "Here we are," he agreed, lifting her hand to his lips. "Thank you for saying it for us both. I promise I won't always forget. Even if you do," she said with a gentle squeeze of his hand, "I'll be here to remind you. That's what marriage is, helping each other remember what matters." It was a promise they would keep through the years that followed, as they built their life together in Gold Hill. The horse breeding business, which Thaddeus named Songbird Ranch in honor of Naomi's café, grew steadily under his careful management. His knowledge of bloodlines and his genuine affection for the animals earned him a reputation that spread beyond Colorado, drawing buyers from as far as California. Naomi continued to run the café, implementing the changes they had discussed during Thaddeus's recovery. The two-tier pricing system proved successful, allowing her to serve the community while also turning a reliable profit. With the additional income, she was able to hire help, giving her more time to assist Thaddeus at the ranch and eventually to care for their growing family. Their first child, a son they named James after Naomi's father, was born a year after their wedding. He had Thaddeus's dark hair and Naomi's green eyes, a combination that would later charm the local girls as he grew into a handsome young man with his father's way with horses and his mother's kind heart. 2 years later, twin daughters joined the family, Elizabeth and Sarah, identical in appearance with their mother's chestnut hair but distinct in personality from their earliest days. Elizabeth was bold and adventurous, always the first to try something new, while Sarah was thoughtful and observant, taking in the world with quiet curiosity. Their fourth child, another son they named Robert, completed their family 3 years after the twins. He was a sturdy child with a contagious laugh who would grow to share his father's height and his mother's musical abilities. The years brought challenges, of course. There were difficult seasons when drought affected the ranch or illness swept through the town. The twins' birth had been particularly hard on Naomi, leaving her bedridden for weeks afterward, and Thaddeus had known true fear as he'd watched her struggle to recover. There were financial setbacks, too, a promising stallion that died unexpectedly, a fire that damaged part of the barn one harsh winter, the economic downturn of 1893 that reduced the demand for quality horses temporarily. But they weathered each storm together, their faith and love providing an anchor when circumstances threatened to overwhelm them. And there were countless moments of joy. The children's first steps and words, the pride of seeing the ranch flourish, quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains they both had come to love. They celebrated each anniversary with a special meal, and without fail, Thaddeus would reach for Naomi's hand before they ate, wanting to say the grace himself as a reminder of how far they'd come. In 1901, after 25 years of marriage, they hosted a celebration that brought together friends, family, and neighbors from miles around. The ranch had expanded to 50 acres by then, the original small house replaced by a comfortable 2-story home that accommodated their family and frequent guests. The café, still a fixture in Gold Hill though now managed primarily by Elizabeth, who had inherited her mother's culinary talents, provided the feast. James, at 24, had recently married a schoolteacher from Denver and was gradually taking over more responsibility at the ranch. The twins, at 22, were finding their own paths, Elizabeth at the café and Sarah preparing to attend a women's college in the East, her academic abilities having earned her a coveted scholarship. Robert, at 19, was working alongside his father and brother, showing a particular talent for training even the most difficult horses. As twilight fell on the anniversary celebration, Thaddeus found a moment alone with Naomi, drawing her away from the gathering to the quiet of their garden, where late summer roses filled the air with fragrance. "You remember that day in the café?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they stood beneath the arbor he'd built for their 10th anniversary. "When I was just a dusty stranger passing through. I remember thinking you had the saddest eyes I'd ever seen," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "And wondering what had put that sadness there. I was lost," he said simply. "Searching for something I couldn't name. I never imagined I'd find it in Gold Hill." She looked up at him, her green eyes as bright and beautiful at 47 as they had been at 25. "And what was it you found?" "Purpose. Home." He kissed her gently, then added, "You." The party continued around them, their children and friends and neighbors celebrating not just their marriage but the life they'd built together. From the uncertain beginnings of a broken man and a woman alone in the world, they had created something enduring, a family, a business, a legacy of love and faith that would continue long after they were gone. As they rejoined the celebration, Thaddeus paused at the head of the long table where their family was gathered. He raised his glass and the crowd quieted, waiting for his words. 25 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the yard, "I came to Gold Hill with nothing but a desperate hope and the clothes on my back. I thought I was looking for gold." He looked at Naomi, standing beside him with her hand in his. "Instead, I found a treasure beyond price." There were nods and murmurs of agreement from those who had witnessed their story unfold. "Before we eat this wonderful meal, I'd like to say grace," Thaddeus continued, bowing his head. The gathering followed suit, a moment of shared reverence descending over the party. "Lord," Thaddeus said, his voice clear and strong, "thank you for 25 years of blessings too numerous to count, for our children and their bright futures, for this land that has provided for us, for friends and neighbors who have become family. And most of all, for Naomi, whose love and faith have been my guiding stars through every dark night and sunny day. Amen." As he finished, he caught Naomi's eye, and the look that passed between them held a lifetime of shared memories and private jokes, trials overcome and joys celebrated, ordinary days and extraordinary moments that had woven together to create a love story neither could have imagined on that hot summer day when a dusty stranger walked into a café in Gold Hill. "He remembers now," Naomi whispered with a smile, echoing those words from long ago. "But I'm still here to whisper it for both of us if needed." "Always," Thaddeus agreed, kissing her hand where his mother's ring still encircled her finger. "And for always." The years continued to pass, bringing changes to Gold Hill and to the Walker family. The small mining town grew with the arrival of the railroad, and Songbird Ranch expanded to meet the increasing demand for quality horses. James and his wife blessed Thaddeus and Naomi with 3 grandchildren, while Elizabeth married the son of Milton from the general store, adding 2 more grandchildren to the family. Sarah returned from college to teach at Gold Hill's growing school, and Robert eventually took over the day-to-day management of the ranch, freeing his parents to enjoy a more relaxed pace in their later years. As they aged, Thaddeus and Naomi remained the heart of the family, hosting Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, offering wisdom when asked and silent support when needed. Their love, tempered by time and strengthened by shared experiences, continued to deepen in ways neither had imagined possible in their youth. In 1926, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a golden milestone marked by a week of festivities that brought together 4 generations of Walkers and most of Gold Hill's residents. Thaddeus, at 82, moved more slowly now, his once dark hair completely white, the limp from his long-ago injury more pronounced. Naomi, at 75, retained her graceful carriage and warm smile, though arthritis had begun to stiffen her once nimble fingers. It was during this celebration that Thaddeus, seated beside Naomi on the porch of their home, surrounded by the family they had created together, leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Thank you for saying grace for us both all those years ago. It changed everything." She turned to him, her eyes bright with understanding. "It was never just about the prayer, you know. It was about seeing each other, truly seeing when no one else did." He nodded, taking her hand in his as they had done countless times over the decades. "I saw you, Naomi Walker. From that very first day I saw you. And I saw you," she replied softly, "the man you were and the man you would become." As the sun set on their 50th year together, painting the Colorado sky in shades of gold and rose, Thaddeus and Naomi sat in comfortable silence, watching their legacy unfold around them. From a chance meeting in a small café to this moment of golden celebration, their journey had been one of faith found, love nurtured, and grace both divine and human freely given. And when dinner was served that evening, Thaddeus remembered to say grace, his voice weathered by age but strong with gratitude for the life they had built together, a life that began when he forgot to say grace, and she bowed her head and whispered it for them both.